The Tier 3 story I decided to do is called Till Death Do Us Part, and it's about domestic abuse in South Carolina. And I find it really interesting because right off the bat from this picture, you can already see that it's going to be the type of story that's going to get you involved. And so, to begin at part 1, it really starts off with impactful video and powerful sound.
He turned out to be Mr. Harm.
I find it really cool because it gives different perspectives of men and women of different ethnicities, and it makes the video really impactful. I feel like the background music also adds to it. Part 1 starts off with pretty scary statistics about domestic abuse in South Carolina, and it also compares to different statistics, which I feel like also draws readers in from the very beginning. And it's also more interesting because it's not only do they have the statistics, but they have links connected so you can see the evidence. Well, it's not loading, but there's all different kinds of links that really help you see how severe the situation is that they're writing about and that they chose to do a story on. I found this really interesting in the section called A Lack of Action, which to mention, each of these titles are really, they draw a lot of attention, which I really like. And this map right here really made me more interested in the story. It tells the rate of women that were murdered by men per capita in South Carolina, which you can hover and see, which is really scary, but I feel like at the same time, it's also part of the purpose that the authors wanted readers to like really get out of it, of how severe this situation is. More of these statistics and icons pop up that really show how scary it is for women in South Carolina and how serious the problem of domestic abuse is. And as you keep going down, pictures of a funeral scene bring even more emotion to the piece. Wife beaters get lenient treatment again with the headlines. I found this map to be one of the most interesting parts of the piece because it is about the fatal incidents of criminal domestic violence against women, and if you hover over each of these little red dots, you get information about the story of a woman who was killed, and I find it to really bring a lot of emotion because it's so sad, but then at the same time, that's part of the purpose of the story. Even more statistics were found about how grave this problem really is and how a lot of people don't even get imprisoned for it. There's so many links that support all of their arguments, which I found really cool, even though the copy does get a little long. And there's video at the bottom right here, which I thought was really impactful to kind of add the faces of domestic violence because it really is so diverse of a problem.
My father came here with the ideal American dream, and he could have had it all.
The video really makes you feel as if you're there. A victim's daughter explains what her father did to her mother. What I really like too is that there's a description at the bottom, so if you don't have time to watch it, you can get the gist of everything that happened. And as you go on to part 2, it kind of gets a little more serious and talks about legislative inaction to really show how lawmakers and basically the state of South Carolina wasn't really addressing the issue. It immediately starts off with a personal story about a woman in the South Carolina State House. I think it really adds more context to the story. And side to side, I thought this was really impactful because on one side, it's how long it really took for a bill to be enacted, whereas on the other side, it's the different stories of women getting murdered during that time that bill could have been enacted. So as you scroll down, you kind of visualize how serious it gets. Part 3 I also found really interesting because it talks about how conservative culture and religion and tradition really played a part in all of these devastating happenings. There's so many statistics and there's a lot of critique about the judicial system of South Carolina, but I found it really interesting because for every critique, there's a different statistic to support it, so you can tell it's not just opinionated, and there is a lot of great reporting that went into this. I found it cool because they also interview people that I wouldn't expect to have seen, like even a minister who talks about how churches have not always been a place for refuge. It really shows readers and it allows readers to comprehend why the state's jury and other rules are the way they are in South Carolina and what could be done to really fix it. And again, with the Faces of Domestic Violence, I feel like is one of the most impactful parts of the entire project.
I was at a very low point in my life.
Because I feel like if you don't want to read through everything, you can just go down to the bottom and really visualize and see everything that's going on. And if you need more context, you can just read what's at the bottom right here. Part 4 is in the middle of the story, which I feel like really comes to the climax of the story because it talks about one of the most severe instances of this woman who survived a bullet to the head by her then husband. And the video here comes in the middle, which is a little bit of a different setup, but I found it to be really cool because as you read more, you get more and more into it because it feels like you're actually there, and it brings a lot of emotion about, which I think is extremely impactful. The narrative just really draws you in, and everything adds insight to why women find it difficult to leave these types of relationships, and even from the lens of shelters and all of the sources that they have are extremely professional and knowledgeable, coming from like directors of gender study programs or other things. And these pictures, just all the visuals in this project really allow you to be a part of the story as well. And then part 5, I really found this interesting because the details are really intense. It starts off with a young woman cowers in the passenger seat of a banged-up Cadillac, blood oozing from scratches carved in her face. The word choices in this are really interesting because it just reminds me of like a really impactful print story, but instead it's being brought to life by pictures and videos in a multimedia segment. I think they really do a good job of reeling you into the story. It talks a lot about Charleston's justice system, but again, for every critique, there's facts and statistics that support every one of their arguments, and again, another video that really drives home the point of this entire project. Part 6 has a similar setup as the rest of the Tier 3 project, and it has more critique about the communication in South Carolina to prevent abuse. It really has a strong message on how it takes a community to start a culture. It also compares South Carolina to other states and gives examples on what can be done to prevent other types of deadly cases from happening. There's a lot more effective pictures that really make you feel like you're there instead of you're just reading a bunch of copy. Again, the headlines also help. I found this picture to be really interesting because I didn't expect to see anything like that there, and also I find it cool because it introduces the survivor in a way where you don't have to see her face, and instead her entire story is just unveiled. And all of these pictures about support really drives it home at the end. And the faces of domestic violence right here, I found this really interesting. This video told a really impactful story about this man whose mother and siblings were killed by a stepfather. It's a really devastating story, but I think it's great to add a male perspective of hurt and emotion instead of just leaving it as a woman's problem. Part 7 at the end is really impactful as well, which I think it's really neat that they added all of these different kinds of phone numbers to really push readers to take this story beyond just seeing it on the internet, but to really take a stand and to carry it with them after. And I find it really interesting because it provides problems and possible solutions, which I think again leaves readers on kind of an inspirational note. However, I could really see how this last section could be a bit lengthy and unnecessary for some people, but I found all of these really cool. That all of these problems and solutions, so much reporting and so much effort went into really finding them. And I found it, in the end, I found that I really enjoyed this piece because of how informative it was. I think it could have added a bit more multimedia aspects to make it a bit more engaging than having so much to read, but I also find it really cool that they have updates and links to their other social media so that you could keep following through with the story.